My daughter-in-law raised her champagne flute high, her emerald bracelet catching the restaurant's golden lights, and her voice cut through the birthday celebration like a knife. "Can you believe it? 70 years old and still scrubbing toilets for minimum wage," Vivian laughed, loud enough for the entire family gathering to hear. "How embarrassing, Helen." The laughter that followed was sharp and merciless, while my son Daniel sat frozen, staring into his wineglass like it held all the answers he couldn't find. My chest tightened, my face burned with shame, and for a moment I couldn't catch my breath. But just as I pushed back from the table to leave, a commanding voice behind me said, "Mrs. Thompson, is that you?" And in that instant, the restaurant fell silent, and Vivian's laughter died in her throat. So before we continue, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And let me know in the comments which state or country you're watching from. Now let's dive into this incredible story of how one woman's past kindness came back to change everything. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in my small apartment on Maple Street in Riverside Heights. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., same as I had every day for the past 4 years, my joints protesting as I swung my legs out of the narrow single bed. The floorboards creaked under my feet, a sound I'd grown accustomed to, though it still reminded me of how different my life had become. My reflection in the bathroom mirror told the story of 7 decades lived, most of them happily, some of them heartbreakingly. The woman staring back at me had silver hair that I kept neatly pinned, laugh lines around hazel eyes that had seen too much lately, and hands that bore the evidence of hard work, calluses from scrub brushes, cuts from cleaning supplies, fingers that ached from gripping mops and vacuum handles. "Another day, Helen," I whispered to my reflection, applying the discount lipstick I'd bought from the dollar store. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little more human, a little less invisible. My apartment was small, just a bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and living area that could barely fit my secondhand couch and the small television Daniel had given me last Christmas. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine. After everything that had happened, having a place to call my own meant everything. I dressed carefully in my uniform, a plain navy polo shirt with Sunshine Cleaning Services embroidered on the pocket, paired with comfortable black pants and non-slip shoes. The uniform wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and at 70, I was grateful to have any work at all. The coffee I made was instant. Real coffee was a luxury I couldn't afford on my salary. As I sat at my tiny kitchen table, sipping the bitter brew and looking out at the apartment complex's courtyard, I allowed myself a few minutes to remember. To think about the woman I used to be. Helen Richardson, that was my maiden name. I'd married James Thompson when I was 22, fresh out of business school with dreams of changing the world. We'd been so happy then, so full of hope. James worked his way up from a junior accountant to partner at Harrison & Associates, while I built my own consulting firm, Richardson Business Solutions, from the ground up. Those had been golden years. We lived in a beautiful colonial house on Elmwood Drive, the kind of neighborhood where children rode bikes on tree-lined streets and neighbors knew each other's names. I wore suits to client meetings, drove a reliable sedan, and had a secretary named Patricia who managed my calendar. I was respected, successful, and proud of what I'd built. Daniel had been our miracle baby, born when I was 35 after years of trying. We'd poured all our love into that boy. Piano lessons, baseball teams, summer camps, the best schools we could afford. He was bright, funny, and kind-hearted, with James's steady nature and my determination. The memory of 10-year-old Daniel running into my home office after school, backpack dropping to the floor as he excitedly told me about his day, still brought a smile to my lips. "Mom, guess what happened in science class today?" he'd say, and I'd put down whatever I was working on because nothing was more important than my son's excitement about learning. James and I had been partners in every sense of the word. He'd help with Daniel's homework while I finished client presentations. I'd attend his company events while he supported my business ventures. We dreamed of traveling the world together once Daniel was grown, of growing old surrounded by grandchildren, of celebrating 50 years of marriage in the same house where we'd raised our family. Cancer had other plans. James's diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning in March, 15 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The oncologist's words felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and the ground from beneath my feet. 6 months, he said, maybe less. We'd fought it together, James and I, sold our dream vacation fund to pay for experimental treatments, mortgaged the house to afford the best doctors. I put my business on hold to become his full-time caregiver, and for a while it seemed like love might be enough to beat the odds. It wasn't. James passed away on a cold November morning, holding my hand and telling me he was proud of the woman I was, proud of the son we'd raised together. He whispered, "Take care of our boy. And take care of yourself, Helen. Promise me you'll be happy." I'd promised, though I couldn't imagine how. The grief had been overwhelming, but I'd had Daniel to think about. He was 18 then, starting his freshman year at State University, and I was determined that his father's death wouldn't derail his future. So I dried my tears, sold the house to pay off medical debt, and poured what was left into Daniel's education and my business recovery.
For a few years, it worked. I rebuilt Richardson Business Solutions, taking on smaller clients, but steadier ones. I moved to a modest apartment in Riverside Heights, nothing like the house on Elmwood Drive, but comfortable enough. Daniel thrived in college, studying business and economics, calling home every Sunday to tell me about his classes and his friends. That's when he met Vivian. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tall and blonde, with the kind of confidence that comes from growing up privileged. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and her mother was on the board of half the charity organizations in the city. Vivian had never wanted for anything in her life, and it showed in the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she looked at people like me. Daniel brought her home for Thanksgiving during his junior year, and I'd tried so hard to like her. I'd cooked for 3 days, bought new dishes I couldn't really afford, and worn my best dress, the black one I'd bought for James's funeral but rarely had occasion to wear. "Your apartment is cozy," Vivian had said, looking around my living room like she was examining a museum exhibit of how the other half lived. Her smile was polite but distant, and I caught her whispering to Daniel later, "Are you sure she's okay living here? It's so small." I'd brushed it off then, telling myself she was young, that she'd warm up to me once she got to know me. Daniel was clearly smitten, and if she made him happy, I wanted to support them. But the signs were there from the beginning. The way she'd check her expensive watch when I talked too long. The way she'd suggest restaurants for dinner that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The way she'd talk about her family's vacation home in Aspen or their yacht at Marina Bay, always with the subtle emphasis that made it clear these weren't experiences I could relate to. When Daniel graduated summa cum laude, I was so proud I cried. He'd overcome losing his father, excelled in his studies, and landed a good job at Meridian Financial Group. The future looked bright. Then came the engagement. Daniel had proposed to Vivian at some fancy resort in Napa Valley, a weekend trip that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. When they came back, flashing a diamond ring that must have been worth a small fortune, I smiled and congratulated them while my heart sank. It wasn't that I didn't want Daniel to be happy. I did, desperately. But I could see the way Vivian looked at me, the way she calculated my value and found me wanting. She was already planning their future, and I got the distinct impression that future didn't include much room for an aging mother-in-law who cleaned houses for a living. The business had started failing around that time. My biggest client, Riverside Community Bank, was bought out by a larger corporation that brought in their own consultants. 3 other longtime clients downsized and cut external services. Suddenly, the steady income I'd relied on for years was gone. And at 66, I was too old to easily find new clients who would take a chance on me. I'd hidden the financial trouble from Daniel at first. He was so happy, so excited about his engagement and his new job. I didn't want to burden him with my problems, especially when he was trying to build his own life. But eventually, the bills caught up with me. The rent on my apartment, the payments on the small business loan I'd taken out years earlier, the medical bills from James that were still trickling in, it all became too much. I was 3 months behind on rent when I finally swallowed my pride and called Daniel. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" he'd said, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. "Of course I'll help you. We're family." He'd given me enough to catch up on rent and keep me afloat for a few more months, but it was clear that my business consulting days were over. At 67, I needed steady employment, something reliable that didn't depend on landing clients or maintaining a professional image I could no longer afford. That's how I had ended up at Sunshine Cleaning Services. Mrs. Rodriguez, the owner, was a kind woman in her 50s who'd built the business from nothing. She took one look at my business background and my desperate situation and offered me a chance. "The work is hard," she said honestly, "and the pay isn't much. But it's steady, and I treat my employees fairly. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter what kind of work they do." I was grateful for the opportunity, even as it felt like stepping into a completely different world. Gone were the business suits and client meetings, replaced with cleaning supplies and rubber gloves. Instead of analyzing quarterly reports, I was scrubbing toilets and mopping floors. Instead of being called Mrs. Thompson by respectful clients, I was just the cleaning lady to most of the people whose homes I entered. The physical work was harder than I had expected. My back ached constantly from bending and lifting. My knees protested against hours spent on bathroom floors. My hands, once soft from office work, became rough and cracked from chemical cleaners. But I kept going because I had to, because giving up wasn't an option. Daniel had tried to help when he could, slipping me extra money here and there, calling to check on me, but I could tell he was uncomfortable with my new situation. When friends asked about his mother, what was he supposed to say? That she used to run her own business, but now cleaned other people's toilets for $8 an hour? And then there was Vivian's reaction. The first time she saw me in my uniform, picking Daniel up from their apartment because my old car was in the shop, I watched her face carefully. The shock, the embarrassment, the way she quickly looked around to see if any of their neighbors had noticed me walking up to their building.
"Helen," she'd said, her voice strained with false cheerfulness, "how nice to see you." From that point on, our relationship, which had been politely distant, became openly strained. She'd make little comments about my appearance, my job, my living situation. Never cruel enough to be called outright mean, but pointed enough to make her feelings clear. "I worry about Daniel," she'd say to me during family gatherings. "It must be so stressful for him having to worry about everything." The pause before everything always felt loaded, heavy with implication. Or she'd talk about her own mother, who spent her days playing tennis at the country club and organizing charity galas. "Mom's so busy with her volunteer work," she'd say. "She's always organizing fundraisers for the children's hospital. It's so fulfilling to give back when you have the time and resources, don't you think?" The contrast was always clear. Her mother gave back to society, while I scrubbed society's messes. But I endured it because I loved Daniel, and because I hoped that maybe, with time, Vivian would see past my circumstances to the person I was underneath. I'd raised a good man, built a successful business from nothing, survived losing the love of my life and starting over in my 60s. Surely that counted for something. It didn't. Not to her. The breaking point had come 6 months ago, at Daniel and Vivian's housewarming party. They'd bought a beautiful townhouse in Harbor View, the kind of place I could never have afforded even in my best years. I had saved for weeks to buy them a nice wedding gift, a set of crystal wine glasses that had cost me nearly a month's worth of grocery money. I dressed as nicely as I could, wearing the same black dress from Thanksgiving years earlier, and arrived with my carefully wrapped gift. Most of the other guests were young professionals. Daniel's colleagues and Vivian's sorority friends, all of them successful and polished in ways that made me feel ancient and out of place. But I'd tried to fit in, making conversation about the beautiful house and congratulating them on their new life together. I was genuinely happy for Daniel, proud of how well he was doing, how far he'd come from that little boy doing homework at my kitchen table. That's when I overheard Vivian talking to one of her friends near the kitchen. Oh God, I hope she doesn't stay too long. It's so embarrassing. Daniel's mother is a maid now. Can you imagine? I keep worrying she's going to offer to clean someone's wine glass or something. Her friend had laughed, a high, cruel sound that cut through me like a blade. Seriously? How awkward. Does she even know how to act around normal people anymore? I doubt it, Vivian had replied. She showed up in the same dress she wore to our engagement party 2 years ago. And those shoes, I think they bought them at Payless. It's like she doesn't even try. I'd stood there for a moment, gift still in my hands, listening to them discuss me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person. The crystal glasses suddenly felt too heavy, too expensive, too much like trying to buy acceptance that would never come. I'd left the gift on their counter and slipped out without saying goodbye. Daniel had called the next day, apologetic and embarrassed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Vivian didn't mean it the way it sounded. She was just nervous about the party." But I could hear the strain in his voice, the exhaustion of a man caught between the woman he loved and the mother who'd raised him. And I realized with painful clarity that my presence in their life wasn't a blessing, it was a burden. From that day forward, I made myself smaller, quieter, less present. I stopped attending their social events unless specifically asked. I kept my visits short and functional. I stopped sharing details about my life, my work, my struggles, because it was clear that my reality made them uncomfortable. And now, here we were, at Vivian's 30th birthday celebration at Romano's Fine Dining, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Daniel had insisted I come, said it was important to be there for Vivian's milestone birthday. I had agreed because I loved my son, but I dreaded it for weeks. The restaurant was everything I'd expected, all marble and crystal and prices that made me dizzy. I'd worn my best dress again, the faithful black one, and tried to prepare myself for an evening of feeling out of place among Vivian's successful, sophisticated friends. But I hadn't prepared myself for public humiliation. As I sat there in Romano's private dining room, watching Vivian hold court with her champagne flute and her emerald bracelet catching the light, I felt the weight of every choice that had brought me to this moment. The years of sacrifice for Daniel's education, the business I'd built and lost, the husband I loved and buried, the pride I'd swallowed to take any job that would keep me independent. And now, at 70 years old, I was being mocked for the crime of working hard to survive. The laughter around the table felt like a physical attack, each clutter and snicker a reminder of how far I'd fallen in their eyes. I gripped my napkin tighter, feeling the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes, and made the decision to leave with whatever dignity I had left. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Mrs. Thompson, is that you?" The voice was deep, authoritative, and carried a tone of respect I hadn't heard directed at me in years. The entire room fell silent so quickly that I could hear the soft jazz music playing in the background, could hear the clink of silverware from other tables, could hear my own heart pounding in my ears.
"The technology is all there," he'd said, his accent becoming more pronounced as his excitement grew. "Wireless communication, digital cameras, internet connectivity, it's all being developed right now by different companies for different purposes. I want to be the first to put it all together for home security." I'd studied his drawings,
his projections, his market analysis. For someone with no formal business training, his research was surprisingly thorough. He'd identified his target demographic, researched his competition, even developed preliminary cost projections from manufacturing and marketing. This is impressive work, I'd told him honestly. But if banks won't invest, what makes you think I can help? I'm a business consultant, not a venture capitalist. That's when he'd looked at me with those burning eyes and said something that I'd never forgotten. Because you understand what it's like to build something from nothing. I've researched you, Mrs. Thompson. You started Richardson Business Solutions in your garage with a used computer and a dream. You know what it feels like to have everyone tell you that you're not good enough, not experienced enough, not worth the risk. He'd been right, of course. I had started my consulting firm with almost nothing, working out of my home office while James handled the bills and Daniel napped in his playpen beside my desk. I'd faced plenty of skepticism from established businesses who didn't think a young woman could understand their needs or challenges. "What exactly are you asking for?" I'd asked. $50,000, he'd replied without hesitation. "I know it's a lot. I know you don't know me from Adam, but I've done the math, Mrs. Thompson. With $50,000, I can build the first prototypes, file the necessary patents, and create a working demonstration that will prove to real investors that this concept works." $50,000. In 1998, that had been a substantial sum, especially for a consulting firm that was still building its client base. It represented months of revenue, money that James and I had been saving for Daniel's future college expenses. But there had been something about this young man. Something in his desperate honesty and meticulous preparation that had spoken to me. Maybe it was because I saw something of myself in his determination. Maybe it was because I believed, deep in my gut, that his idea really could work. Or maybe it was because, at 45 years old, I'd reached a point in my life where playing it safe felt less important than taking a chance on someone who reminded me of my younger, hungrier self. "I'll need to see a more detailed business plan," I'd told him. "Financial projections for the first 5 years, a complete market analysis, and a timeline for product development. Can you have that for me by Friday?" The hope that had blazed in his eyes had been almost painful to witness. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I'll have everything you need." He'd been back on Friday with a business plan that had impressed even James, who'd reviewed it with his accountant's eye for detail and potential problems. The projections were realistic, the timeline achievable, and the market research thorough. "It's a risk," James had said over dinner that night, "but it's a calculated risk. And Helen, if this kid is even half right about the market potential..." I'd made the decision that weekend. On Monday morning, I'd called Lucas Westbrook into my office and written him a check for $50,000. "I believe in your idea," I'd told him as I handed over the check. "More importantly, I believe in you. Don't make me regret this." The gratitude in his eyes had been overwhelming. "I won't, Mrs. Thompson. I swear to you, I'll pay back every penny with interest." "I know you will," I'd said. And somehow, despite the magnitude of the risk I was taking, I'd meant it. That had been the last time I'd seen Lucas Westbrook. Oh, I'd heard from him, of course. For the first few years, he'd sent quarterly updates on his progress, along with small payments toward the loan. The updates were encouraging. Patents filed, prototypes completed, initial contracts signed with small security companies interested in testing his wireless systems. Then the payments had stopped. It wasn't uncommon in my business. Young entrepreneurs were optimistic about repayment schedules, but the reality of building a company meant that every penny had to go back into development and growth. I'd written off the loan mentally, chalking it up to the cost of taking chances on people with big dreams.
Besides, by 2003, I'd had bigger concerns. James's cancer diagnosis had turned our world upside down, and tracking down a young man who owed me money seemed less important than fighting for my husband's life. After James died, the debt seemed even more irrelevant. I had medical bills to pay, a business to rebuild, and a son to support through college. The $50,000 I'd given to Lucas Westbrook felt like money from another lifetime, invested by a different version of myself who had the luxury of taking such risks. Now, sitting in Romano's fine dining with this impeccably dressed man who claims to be that desperate young entrepreneur, I felt like I was looking at a ghost. "You remember now," he said softly, studying my face with those same intense eyes, though they were calmer now, more confident. "Lucas?" I whispered, and as I said it, I could see the resemblance. The same cheekbones, the same determined set to his jaw, but filled out now, mature, successful.
I turned slowly, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that someone in this room full of successful people could possibly be addressing me with such genuine warmth. And when I saw his face, the world shifted beneath my feet. The man standing behind me was tall, probably in his late 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that held a warmth I hadn't expected. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. But it was his expression that caught me off guard. Genuine recognition mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "Mrs. Thompson," he said again, and this time I caught the slight accent, something European that made my name sound elegant instead of ordinary. "I can't believe it's really you." I blinked, my mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Around the table, every conversation had stopped. Vivian's friends stared with undisguised curiosity, their perfectly made-up faces turning between this distinguished stranger and me like they were watching a tennis match. Daniel looked confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to place this man who clearly knew his mother. But it was Vivian's expression that I found most satisfying. The color had drained from her perfectly contoured cheeks, leaving her looking pale and uncertain beneath her expertly applied makeup. Her champagne flute hung forgotten in her hand, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed at a complete loss for words. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible above the soft jazz playing in the background. Do we know each other?" The man's smile widened, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been amusement in his dark eyes. "We do indeed, though I'm not surprised you don't remember me immediately. It's been quite some time, and he gestured to himself with a self-deprecating chuckle. "I've changed considerably since we last met." He pulled out the empty chair next to me, the one that had been reserved for Daniel's college friend who'd canceled at the last minute, and settled into it with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. The movement brought with it the scent of expensive cologne, something subtle and sophisticated that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. "Please," he said, extending his hand toward me, "allow me to reintroduce myself. Lucas Westbrook." The name hit me like a physical blow. Lucas Westbrook. My mind raced backward through the years, searching for the connection, and suddenly I was 25 years younger, sitting in my old office on the 3rd floor of the Riverside Business Center. It had been in 1998, a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I remembered because the autumn light had been streaming through my office windows, and I had been reviewing quarterly projections when Patricia had knocked on my door. "Mrs. Thompson, there's a young man here to see you. Says he has a business proposal. No appointment, but he seems desperate." I almost turned him away. My schedule was packed, and walk-in clients usually wasted time with unrealistic dreams and no understanding of what it took to actually run a business. But something in Patricia's voice had made me curious. "Send him in," I said, "but tell him he has 15 minutes.
The young man who had walked into my office that day had been nothing like the polished gentleman sitting beside me now. He was thin to the point of gauntness. His cheap suit hung loose on his frame, his shoes scuffed and worn. His hair was too long, falling into eyes that burned with desperation and determination in equal measure. He couldn't have been more than 25, probably younger, with the kind of intensity that came from having everything to lose and nothing left to fall back on. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice thick with what I now recognize as a Romanian accent. "I thank you for seeing me. I know you don't know me, but I've heard about your work with small businesses, about how you help people who others won't take seriously." I gestured for him to sit, intrigued despite myself. "What can I do for you, Mr. Westbrook?" he said quickly. "Lucas Westbrook. Well, it's actually Lucien Weiss, but I thought Lucas Westbrook sounded more American for business purposes." Even then, I appreciated his honesty. So many young entrepreneurs tried to oversell themselves, to present a facade of success they hadn't earned. This young man was laying the cards on the table from the first moment. He said, "I have an idea, a revolutionary idea that could change how people think about home security systems. But every bank I've approached, every investor I've pitched to, they all say the same thing. I'm too young, too inexperienced, too much of a risk." He pulled out a worn folder, the kind you could buy at any office supply store for less than $1, and spread blueprints and sketches across my desk. His hands shook slightly as he explained his concept, a wireless security system that could be monitored remotely, something that seemed almost like science fiction in 1998, but made perfect sense the way he described it. His smile was radiant. "It's really me, Mrs. Thompson. Though I have to say, you haven't aged a day." I laughed, a sound that came out more like a sob. "That's kind of you to say, but we both know better." "No," he said, his voice serious now. "I mean it. You look exactly like the woman who saved my life 26 years ago." Around the table, the silence had become deafening. I was vaguely aware of Vivian's friends leaning in closer, trying to catch every word of this unexpected drama. Daniel looked like he was trying to solve a complex equation in his head, while Vivian herself had gone completely still, her champagne flute now set carefully on the table in front of her. "Saved your life?" I repeated. "Lucas, I just gave you a business loan." He shook his head firmly. "Mrs. Thompson, what you gave me was much more than money. You gave me hope when I had none. You believed in me when everyone else saw a foolish immigrant boy with impossible dreams." His voice dropped lower, becoming more intimate, as if we were the only two people in the room. "Do you have any idea what my life was like before I walked into your office that day? I was living in a studio apartment in the worst part of Riverside Heights, working 3 different jobs just to afford ramen noodles and keep the electricity on. I'd been rejected by 17 different banks, laughed out of 8 investor meetings, and told by my own family back in Romania that I was wasting my time chasing fantasies." I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes as he continued. "I had exactly $47 to my name when I decided to approach you. $47 and a dream that everyone told me was impossible. I'd heard about you from other small business owners, heard that you were different, that you actually listened to people instead of just looking at credit scores and collateral." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, extracting from it a small yellowed piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and placed it on the table between us. It was the carbon copy of the check I'd written him all those years ago. $50,000 dated September 25th, 1998. Signed in my careful handwriting, Helen R. Thompson. "I've carried this with me every day for 26 years, he said quietly. "Every morning when I get dressed, it goes in my wallet. Every business meeting, every negotiation, every moment when I've doubted myself, I look at this and remember the woman who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." My throat was so tight I could barely speak. "Lucas, what happened? I never heard from you after 2001. His expression grew somber. The early years were harder than I'd anticipated. I was so focused on perfecting the technology, on making sure it worked flawlessly, that I underestimated how long it would take to bring a product to market. The money you gave me lasted longer than I had planned because I was living on nothing, sleeping in my workshop, eating one meal a day. He paused, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. By 2002, I'd burned through your investment and maxed out every credit card I could get approved for. I was facing bankruptcy, possibly deportation. The stress was literally killing me. I ended up in the emergency room with what the doctors thought was a heart attack. Turned out to be severe anxiety and malnutrition. I reached out instinctively and placed my hand over his. "Oh, Lucas! I had no idea!" "How could you? I was too proud to ask for more help, too ashamed to admit that I was failing. But lying in that hospital bed, I made a decision. I was going to make your investment worth something no matter what it took." His eyes brightened as he continued. "That's when I met Dr. Sarah Chen. She was the resident who treated me in the ER. When she heard about my security system, she mentioned that her father owned a small chain of electronics stores and might be interested in a partnership. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah Chen had probably been related to the Chen family whose name I'd been forbidden to use in our story. Her father, Mr. Chen, gave me my first real break, not just money but mentorship. He taught me about manufacturing, about distribution, about the business side of technology. Within 2 years, we had our first commercial product on the market." He pulled out his phone and showed me a sleek website with a logo I recognized, Sentinel Security Systems. We launched with wireless home security, just as I had originally planned, but over the years we've expanded into commercial systems, smart home integration, and now we're pioneering AI-assisted surveillance technology. I stared at the screen, trying to process what he was telling me. Sentinel Security Systems was a name I'd heard, a company that advertised during major sporting events and had commercials featuring celebrities endorsing their products. "Lucas," I said slowly, "are you telling me that Sentinel Security is the company that grew from the seed money you planted 26 years ago?" "Mrs. Thompson, Sentinel Security Systems did $800 million in revenue last year. We employ over 3,000 people across 15 countries, and none of it, not $1, not one job, not one innovation, would exist without the check you wrote to a desperate young man who had nowhere else to turn." The room around us had faded away completely. I was dimly aware that other diners at nearby tables were stealing glances at our emotional conversation, but all I could focus on was this man who had apparently built an empire from my long-forgotten investment. "But the payments stopped. I assumed—"
"That I defaulted on the loan," he said with a rueful smile. "I don't blame you for thinking that. But, Mrs. Thompson, I never forgot about my debt to you. Every year since 2005, I've set aside money to repay you. Not just the original $50,000, but with compound interest calculated at a rate that reflects what that investment has grown into." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out an envelope, thick and cream-colored, with my name written across it in elegant script. "I've been trying to find you for over a decade," he said, placing the envelope in front of me. "After the economic downturn in 2008, a lot of small businesses changed hands or closed. When I finally tracked down your old office building, the new tenants told me Richardson Business Solutions had been gone for years. I hired a private investigator, but Helen Thompson is a common name, and you'd moved from your old address." His voice trailed off, and when he spoke again there was emotion in it that he was struggling to control. "I never stopped looking, Mrs. Thompson. I owed you more than money. I owed you acknowledgement, recognition of what your faith in me had made possible. When I walked into this restaurant tonight for a business dinner and heard someone mention the name Helen Thompson, I thought I was imagining things." He gestured toward the table where Vivian sat frozen, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I had no idea you were related to Vivian Ashford. Excuse me, Vivian Thompson now. She's been working in our marketing department for the past 3 years."
The words hit me like a physical blow. Vivian works for Lucas? For the company that had grown from my investment? The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. She works for you? I managed to ask. Lucas nodded, his expression growing more serious. She does. And I have to say, Mrs. Thompson, if I had known that the woman my employee was describing so disrespectfully was the same Helen Thompson who saved my life and made my success possible. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Around the table, I could see the color draining from Vivian's face as she began to understand exactly what was happening. Mrs. Thompson, Lucas said, picking up the envelope and pressing it into my hands. I know this doesn't make up for 26 years of wondering what happened to your investment, but I hope it's a start. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a check written on the elegant letterhead of Sentinel Security Systems. The amount made my vision blur and my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the paper. $2,400,000. This represents your original investment plus compound interest at 12% annually, Lucas explained quietly. It's the minimum of what your $50,000 has grown into as part of Sentinel's success. But Mrs. Thompson, money is just the beginning of what I owe you. He stood up then, his tall frame commanding the attention of everyone in the restaurant's private dining room. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to addressing boardrooms full of important people. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I need you all to understand something about the woman sitting at this table. Every eye in the room focused on him, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks when I realized what he was about to do. This is Mrs. Helen Thompson, and she is the reason I am who I am today. 26 years ago, when I was a desperate immigrant with nothing but a dream, she took a chance on me that no one else would take. She invested in my company when it was nothing more than sketches on paper and wild ambition. He gestured toward me with something that looked like reverence. The company I built from her investment now employs thousands of people and has made me a very wealthy man. Mrs. Thompson isn't just a cleaning lady, as someone at this table so cruelly suggested. She's an angel investor, a businesswoman, and one of the most important people in my life. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the soft jazz music that had been playing throughout this surreal encounter, could hear the subtle sounds of other diners in the restaurant beyond our private room. But from our table, from Vivian, from her friends, from Daniel, who was staring at me with wide, wondering eyes, there was absolute silence. Lucas sat back down beside me and took my hand in both of his. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice gentle again, intimate, I have a proposition for you, but first I think we need to address the elephant in the room. He turned to look directly at Vivian, who had gone so pale that her carefully applied makeup looked garish against her white skin. Miss Mrs. Thompson now, I believe you and I need to have a very serious conversation about how you speak to your colleagues' family members. The way he said colleagues made it clear that Vivian's employment status was very much in question.
The weight of the check in my hands felt surreal, like holding a piece of paper that could reshape reality itself. $2,400,000. I read the numbers again, certain that my 70-year-old eyes were playing tricks on me. But the elegant script remained unchanged. This wasn't a dream or a fantasy. This was Lucas Westbrook, now a successful CEO, sitting beside me with tears in his eyes as he spoke about the debt he'd carried for over 2 decades. Vivian's face had gone from pale to ashen, her carefully applied foundation unable to hide the terror creeping into her expression. She kept glancing between Lucas and me, her mind clearly racing as she tried to process the implications of what she'd just witnessed. Her perfectly manicured fingers clutched the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Daniel, my sweet son, looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
His eyes kept darting from the check in my hands to Lucas's face, and I could see the questions forming behind his confused expression. When had his mother, the woman who now cleans houses for minimum wage, invested in what had apparently become a multi-million-dollar company? The other dinner guests, Vivian's carefully curated collection of successful friends and Daniel's colleagues, sat in stunned silence, their expensive cocktails forgotten as they tried to process this unexpected twist in what was supposed to be a simple birthday celebration. Lucas squeezed my hand gently, his touch warm and reassuring. "I can see you're overwhelmed, Mrs. Thompson, and I don't blame you. This must feel like something out of a movie." I managed a shaky laugh. "That's putting it mildly, Lucas. I don't know what to say. All these years, I thought you'd simply moved on with your life. I never expected that I'd become successful enough to pay you back with interest." He finished with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Thompson, you gave me more than money that day in 1998. You gave me legitimacy. Do you realize what it meant for a desperate immigrant to walk into a bank and say, 'Helen Thompson of Richardson Business Solutions believes in my idea'?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on a distant quality as he remembered. "Your name opened doors that had been slammed in my face. When I went to patent attorneys and mentioned that you were my business consultant, suddenly I was taken seriously. When I approached component suppliers and dropped your name, they offered me payment terms instead of demanding cash up front." I shook my head in amazement. I had no idea my reputation carried that much weight. "Are you kidding?" Lucas's laugh was warm and genuine. "Richardson Business Solutions was legendary among small business owners in this city. You had a reputation for spotting potential that others missed, for taking calculated risks that paid off spectacularly. When word got out that you'd invested in my security system concept, other investors started paying attention." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a presentation. "Let me show you something that might help you understand the full impact of your investment." The screen displayed a timeline titled Sentinel Security Systems, a 26-year journey. I watched as Lucas walked through the milestones: patent filings in 1999, first prototype completed in 2000, initial partnerships formed in 2002. "This is where your influence really became apparent," he said, pointing to an entry from 2003. "Remember I mentioned Dr. Sarah Chen? Her father wasn't just any electronics store owner. He was Richard Chen, who owned Pacific Electronics, a regional chain with connections throughout Asia." The name clicked in my memory. Pacific Electronics had been one of my consulting clients briefly in the early 90s, a small but ambitious family business with big dreams of expansion. "You consulted for Pacific Electronics," he continued, somehow reading the recognition in my expression. "When Richard Chen heard that Helen Thompson had invested in my company, he didn't just offer me a partnership. He offered me mentorship. He said any entrepreneur you believed in was worth his serious consideration." I stared at the timeline, watching as the milestones accelerated after 2003. Major contracts, international expansion, technological breakthroughs, all building on that initial foundation of credibility that my investment had apparently provided. Richard Chen introduced me to his network of Asian manufacturers and distributors. That's how we were able to scale up production so quickly and compete with established security companies. But Mrs. Thompson, none of those doors would have opened if I hadn't been able to say that you believed in my vision. "But Lucas," I protested, "you were talented, determined. You would have succeeded eventually." His expression grew serious. "Maybe. Or maybe I would have given up after the 50th rejection, gone back to Romania with my tail between my legs, and spent the rest of my life wondering, what if?" That September day in 1998, I was literally 3 days from booking a plane ticket home. I had no money, no prospects, and no hope left. The emotion in his voice made my throat tight. "You never told me how desperate things had gotten." "How could I? You were the successful, confident businesswoman, and I was barely keeping body and soul together. But you looked at my plans, listened to my pitch, and saw something worth investing in. That moment changed the trajectory of my entire life.
Around the table, I could see people leaning in to catch every word of this extraordinary conversation. Even the wait staff had begun lingering near our private dining room, clearly sensing that something significant was happening. Lucas turned to address the group more directly. I want all of you to understand something about Mrs. Thompson that she would never tell you herself. She didn't just write me a check and send me on my way. Over the next 3 years, she served as my unofficial business mentor. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Lucas, You absolutely did, he interrupted gently but firmly. Every quarter, when I sent you those progress reports, you'd call me with questions, suggestions, insights that helped me avoid costly mistakes. Remember when I was about to partner with Technova Solutions for distribution? I did remember. Technova had approached Lucas with what seemed like a generous offer to handle nationwide distribution of his security systems, but something about their terms had seemed off to me. You spent 2 hours on the phone with me, walking through their contract line by line. You helped me understand that they were essentially trying to buy my company for pennies on the dollar while making it look like a partnership deal. The memory came flooding back, sitting at my kitchen table with James while he looked over the Technova contract, both of us identifying red flags that could have destroyed Lucas's company before it really got started. If I'd signed that deal, Technova would have owned my patents and my customer list within 2 years. Instead, I walked away and eventually found legitimate distribution partners who helped me grow the company properly. He scrolled further down the timeline, stopping at a photo from 2005 that showed him standing in front of a modest office building with a sign reading, Sentinel Security Systems Headquarters. This was our first real office, he said with obvious pride. 20 employees, all of us crammed into a space that was probably smaller than this restaurant's kitchen. But we were legitimate, we were growing, and we were profitable. The next photo showed a much larger building, modern glass and steel architecture with the Sentinel logo prominently displayed. Our current headquarters, Lucas explained, built in 2015, houses our research and development division, executive offices, and training facilities for our international sales team. I stared at the image, struggling to connect this corporate campus with the desperate young man who'd sat in my office all those years ago. It's incredible, Lucas. You've built something amazing. We built something amazing, he corrected firmly. Mrs. Thompson, I know you've been going through difficult times. I know you've had to take work that's beneath your qualifications, that you've struggled financially. But I need you to understand that you're not just a cleaning lady who happened to help someone once upon a time. You're a founding investor in a major international corporation. He gestured to his phone screen, which now showed a complex organizational chart. Look at this. Sentinel Security Systems corporate structure. Right here, at the very top, is the category for founding investors. There's exactly one name in that category. I leaned closer to see the screen, and there it was, in elegant corporate typography. Helen R. Thompson, founding angel investor, 1998. Lucas, I whispered, you kept my name on your corporate documents all these years? Of course I did. You're part of Sentinel's origin story, part of our official corporate history. Every employee handbook includes a section about our founding principles, and your investment is featured prominently as an example of the kind of faith in potential that we try to emulate with our own business partnerships. He scrolled to what appeared to be a page from an employee orientation manual. There, under a heading that read, Our Founding Story, was a professional headshot of me from 1998, the photo I'd used for Richardson Business Solutions marketing materials. Below it was a paragraph describing my investment and its impact on the company's development. Every single person who works for Sentinel Security Systems learns about Helen Thompson during their first week of employment, Lucas said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. You're not just remembered, Mrs. Thompson, you're celebrated. The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. Every person who worked for Sentinel knew my story, understood my role in the company's success, which meant I turned to look at Vivian, who had gone so still she barely seemed to be breathing. Her eyes were fixed on Lucas's phone screen, staring at my photo with an expression of dawning horror. "Vivian," Lucas said, his tone shifting from warm remembrance to something much colder and more professional. "I believe you work in our marketing department, correct?" She nodded mutely, apparently unable to trust her voice.
Then you've seen this orientation material. You know exactly who Helen Thompson is and what she means to Sentinel security systems. His words were measured, precise, carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to having his statements treated as final. I didn't... Vivian started, then stopped, apparently realizing that any explanation she offered would only make her situation worse. Lucas turned back to me, his expression softening again. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you a direct question, and I hope you'll answer honestly. Were you aware that your daughter-in-law works for my company?" I shook my head. "No, not until you mentioned it tonight. Vivian has always been vague about the details of her job. I knew she worked in marketing for some tech company, but she never mentioned the company name, and I never pressed for details." "And has she ever mentioned Helen Thompson in connection with her workplace?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. I looked at Vivian, whose face had somehow managed to go even paler. "No," I said quietly. "She's never mentioned it." Lucas nodded slowly, his expression grim. "I see. So when you attend mandatory orientation sessions, Vivian, and you hear about our founding investor, Helen Thompson, it never occurs to you that this might be your husband's mother, the woman you've been describing so dismissively?" Vivian's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to whisper, The photo was old, and she looked different, and I never thought—" "You never thought," Lucas repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You never thought that the woman you've been publicly humiliating might be the same Helen Thompson whose story is literally printed in your employee handbook?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Daniel processing this information, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and what looked like growing anger as he began to understand exactly how his wife had been treating me. Lucas pulled out his phone again and made a call. "Jennifer, it's Lucas. I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend evening, but I need you to pull the personnel file for Vivian Ashford. She's married now, so it might be under Vivian Thompson. Yes, marketing department. I need her complete employment history, performance reviews, and any documented interactions with other employees." He paused, listening to the response. "No, nothing's wrong with company security. This is a personal matter that's become a professional concern. I'll explain everything on Monday. Can you have that file ready for me first thing in the morning?" "Perfect. Thank you." He ended the call and looked directly at Vivian. "Miss Ashford, and I'm using your maiden name because I'm not sure you've earned the right to share Mrs. Thompson's family name. You and I are going to have a very detailed conversation on Monday morning." "Mr. Westbrook," Vivian finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain, "I can explain. I didn't realize that publicly mocking a woman for working hard to support herself might be problematic." Lucas's tone was razor sharp. "You didn't realize that referring to someone as just a maid might reflect poorly on your character and judgment." He leaned forward, his executive presence filling the space between them. "Let me help you understand something, Miss Ashford. Sentinel Security Systems has a very clear code of conduct regarding respect for all individuals, regardless of their employment status or economic circumstances. We also have specific policies about how our employees represent the company in their personal lives." Vivian's breathing had become shallow and rapid. "Mr. Westbrook, please, I never meant—" "What you meant is irrelevant. What matters is what you did."
You chose to publicly humiliate a woman who is not only a founding investor in your company, but who also happens to be a member of your family. You turned her honest work into a source of shame and embarrassment. He gestured toward me with obvious respect. Mrs. Thompson has been supporting herself through physical labor that most people half her age couldn't handle. She's shown resilience, dignity, and work ethic that should inspire admiration, not mockery. The fact that you've chosen to treat her with contempt says everything I need to know about your character. The other people at the table were watching this confrontation with fascination and horror. I could see some of Vivian's friends exchanging uncomfortable glances, clearly wondering if they should leave or stay to see how this drama unfolded. Daniel finally spoke, his voice tight with emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Mom, why didn't you tell me about any of this? About the investment, about Mr. Westbrook?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised with so much love and hope, and felt the weight of all the things I'd never shared with him. "Daniel, it was a long time ago. When the payments stopped coming, I assumed the investment had failed. It happens in business. You take risks and sometimes they don't work out."
But you never mentioned it, he pressed. All these years, when you were struggling financially, when you had to take the cleaning job, you never said anything about having made investments like this. Lucas interjected gently. "If I may, Daniel, your mother is probably one of the most humble people I've ever met. She took enormous risks to help other entrepreneurs succeed, but she never expected recognition or gratitude. She certainly wouldn't have mentioned an old investment that she thought had failed." He turned back to me with something that looked like awe in his expression. "Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask, how many other people did you help over the years? How many other desperate entrepreneurs did you believe in when no one else would?" The question caught me off guard. I'd never really thought about my consulting work in those terms. I don't know, Lucas. Helping small businesses was my job, my passion. I probably worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs over the years. And how many of them did you invest your own money in? That was easier to answer. Not many. Maybe a dozen over the course of 25 years. It was always risky, and James and I had to be careful with our finances, especially after Daniel was born. He shook his head in amazement. "A dozen companies? Mrs. Thompson, do you have any idea what happened to those other investments?" I shrugged. "Some failed, which I expected. A few did well enough to pay me back with modest returns. Most fell somewhere in between. Not spectacular successes, but not complete failures either. Have you ever tried to track down what became of those companies?" "No," I admitted. After James died and I had to focus on rebuilding my own business, I didn't have time to follow up on old investments. And later, when I was struggling financially, it seemed pointless to chase after money that was probably long gone. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing this information with the analytical mind that had built Sentinel Security Systems into a global company. "Mrs. Thompson," he said finally, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your investment history, but first, we need to address the immediate situation." He turned back to Vivian, who had been sitting in stunned silence during this exchange. "Miss Ashford, I want you to think very carefully about something. Every person at this table has now witnessed you publicly humiliating the founding investor of the company that employs you. You've heard you mock her for working honest jobs to support herself, while apparently being completely unaware that she played a crucial role in creating the business that pays your salary." Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "The fact that you didn't know makes this worse, not better," Lucas replied coldly. "It means you felt comfortable mocking an elderly woman for her circumstances without having any understanding of her background, her history, or her contributions to society. It reveals a fundamental lack of empathy and respect that I find deeply troubling." He stood up, his tall frame commanding attention from everyone at the restaurant's private dining room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make something very clear.
Mrs. Helen Thompson is not just a maid, as someone at this table so cruelly suggested. She is an entrepreneur, an angel investor, and a founding partner in a company that now employs thousands of people worldwide. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to addressing boardrooms and shareholders. She took risks that established investors wouldn't take, believed in dreams that banks dismissed, and created opportunities for success that have generated millions of dollars in economic value. He gestured toward me with obvious reverence. Mrs. Thompson represents the very best of American entrepreneurship, the willingness to invest in potential, to take calculated risks on innovative ideas, to support the dreams of people that others overlook or dismiss. The speech was making me uncomfortable, but I could see its effect on everyone at the table. Vivian's friends were looking at me with new interest, clearly reevaluating everything they thought they knew about the elderly woman they'd been prepared to pity or ignore. Lucas sat back down and took my hand again. "Mrs. Thompson, I have a proposition for you, but I think it would be better discussed privately. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow? There are some business opportunities I'd like to explore with you." "Business opportunities?" I repeated, feeling overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past hour. "Yes. You see, I've been looking for the right person to head up Sentinel's new Angel Investment Division. Someone with experience identifying potential in overlooked entrepreneurs. Someone who understands the importance of taking calculated risks on innovative ideas." He smiled, and for a moment I could see traces of that desperate young man from 1998. I can't think of anyone more qualified for the position than the woman who took a chance on me when I had nothing but dreams and determination. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline, almost too good to be true. Around the table I could see shocked faces, none more shocked than Vivian's. But before I could respond, Lucas's expression grew serious again as he turned back to my daughter-in-law. "Miss Ashford, I suggest you use the time between now and Monday morning to think very carefully about how you want to explain tonight's behavior, because I can assure you this conversation is far from over."
The drive home from Romano's Fine Dining felt like traveling through a dream. Lucas had insisted on having his driver take me back to my apartment, and I sat in the back of the sleek black sedan, still clutching the check for $2.4 million in my trembling hands. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, but I barely saw them. My mind was spinning too fast to process the familiar streets of Riverside Heights. The business card Lucas had pressed into my palm was elegant, thick cardstock with raised lettering that spelled out Lucas Westbrook, CEO, Sentinel Security Systems. On the back, he'd handwritten his personal cell phone number and a note. "Please call me tomorrow. We have so much more to discuss. LW." As the sedan pulled up to my modest apartment building, I felt a strange disconnect between the luxury vehicle and my surroundings. The driver, a professional man in his 50s, got out to open my door with the same respect he might show any wealthy client. It was a small gesture, but after years of being invisible, being treated with such courtesy felt almost overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed to say as he helped me to the sidewalk. "My pleasure, ma'am," he replied with genuine warmth. "Mr. Westbrook asked me to make sure you got home safely. He also wanted me to give you this." He handed me a folder I hadn't noticed before, thick, manila-colored with "Confidential" stamped across the front in red letters. My name was written on a label in Lucas's careful handwriting. I climbed the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment, my legs shaking from exhaustion and shock. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the peeling paint on the hallway walls, the burnt-out bulb in the fixture outside my door, everything looked exactly the same as it had this morning, but somehow felt completely different. I was the same 70-year-old woman who'd left for dinner a few hours ago, but I was also someone else entirely. Inside my small apartment, I set the check and the folder on my kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea with hands that still trembled. The numbers on the check seemed to glow in the fluorescent lighting.
$2,400,000, more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, more than enough to change everything about my life. But it wasn't just about the money, I realized, as I opened the confidential folder. It was about dignity, respect, recognition of worth I'd thought was lost forever. The folder contained documents that took my breath away. The first page was a letter on Sentinel Security Systems letterhead addressed to me personally. Dear Mrs. Thompson, words cannot adequately express my gratitude for what you did for me 26 years ago, but I hope this documentation will help you understand the full impact of your investment and faith in my vision. Enclosed, you will find complete financial records showing how your $50,000 investment has grown within Sentinel's success, documentation of your official status as angel investor and founder, proposed terms for the angel investment division position we discussed, research regarding your other business investments from 1975 to 2008. Mrs. Thompson, I believe you may be surprised by some of what you'll find in this folder. With deepest respect and gratitude, Lucas Westbrook. My hands shook as I turned to the next page, a detailed financial breakdown that made my head spin. Lucas hadn't just calculated compound interest on my original investment. He had tracked what my $50,000 would be worth if it had been converted to equity shares in Sentinel Security Systems from the beginning. According to these calculations, my investment would now represent approximately 2.3% ownership in a company valued at over $1 billion. The $2.4 million check was just the beginning. It represented accumulated dividends and interest payments I would have received over the years. My actual equity position was worth significantly more. I set the financial documents aside, my mind unable to process numbers that large, and turned to the next section. This was the research Lucas had mentioned regarding my other investments, and as I read through the pages, I felt my world shifting once again. Richardson Business Solutions. Investment Portfolio Analysis, compiled by Meridian Research Group. Confidential report for Lucas Westbrook, CEO, Sentinel Security Systems. The report was thorough, professional, and absolutely shocking. Lucas had hired investigators to track down every entrepreneur I'd ever invested in during my consulting years. The results were laid out in neat columns: company names, investment amounts, current status, estimated valuations. The first entry made my heart stop. Green Tech Solutions, founded 1995. Initial Thompson investment, $35,000. Current status, acquired by Tesla in 2018 for $180 million. Estimated Thompson equity value, $4.2 million. Green Tech Solutions. I remember Marcus Williams, the young engineer who'd come to me with plans for more efficient solar panel manufacturing. He'd been passionate but underfunded, and I'd invested in his startup because I believed renewable energy was the future. When the quarterly reports had stopped coming in 2001, I'd assumed the company had failed like so many tech startups during the dot-com crash. According to this report, Marcus had struggled through the early 2000s but had never given up. Green Tech had eventually become a leader in solar panel efficiency technology, and Tesla had acquired them as part of their renewable energy expansion. The report included a note that Marcus Williams, now Tesla's director of solar innovation, had tried to locate me multiple times over the years to share his success and offer proper compensation for my early investment. The next entry was equally stunning. Aquapure Systems, founded in 1992. Initial Thompson investment, $25,000. Current status, publicly traded water filtration company. Estimated Thompson equity value, $1.8 million.
I remembered Sarah Martinez, the environmental engineer who'd wanted to create affordable water filtration systems for developing countries. Her prototype had been promising, but established companies had dismissed her ideas as unprofitable.
I'd invested because I believed clean water was a basic human right, and Sarah's technology could make a real difference in the world. The report showed that Aquapure had started slowly, but had eventually secured major contracts with humanitarian organizations and government agencies. The company had gone public in 2012, and Sarah Martinez was now CEO of a corporation that provided clean water solutions to over 40 countries. Page after page revealed similar stories. Entrepreneurs I'd believed in who had gone on to build successful companies, create jobs, and make positive impacts on their industries. Many had tried to find me over the years, wanting to share their success and provide proper returns on my investments. TechBridge Educational Software, founded 1989, initial Thompson investment, $18,000, current status, major educational technology company, estimated Thompson equity value, $900,000. Verde Restaurant Group, founded 2003, initial Thompson investment, $40,000, current status, 47 locations across 3 states, estimated Thompson equity value, $1.2 million. Meadowbrook Organic Farms, founded 1994, initial Thompson investment, $22,000, current status, leading organic food distributor. Estimated Thompson equity value, $650,000. The list went on and on. According to Meridian Research Group's calculations, the total value of my forgotten investments was nearly $14 million. I had to set the papers down and take several deep breaths. $14 million. The number seemed impossible, fantastical. I'd spent the last 4 years scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets, worrying about grocery bills and rent payments, while investments I'd written off as failed ventures had grown into multi-million-dollar successes. My phone rang, startling me out of my shock. The caller ID showed Daniel's number. "Mom?" His voice was tentative, uncertain. "Are you okay? You left the restaurant so quickly, and after everything that happened—" "I'm fine, sweetheart," though my voice probably didn't sound convincing. It was just a lot to process. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? About the investments, about helping all these entrepreneurs?" I sighed, settling back in my kitchen chair. "Daniel, you have to understand. When I made those investments, they were just part of my consulting work. I helped small businesses succeed, and sometimes that meant putting my own money at risk. When the companies stopped sending reports or when payments stopped coming, I assumed they'd failed. That's what happens with most startups." "But Mom, tonight Mr. Westbrook made it sound like you was some kind of legendary angel investor." I laughed softly. I was just a business consultant who believed in helping people achieve their dreams. I never thought of myself as anything special. "But you were special." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "You are special. And God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I let Vivian treat you like you were nothing, like you were an embarrassment. I should have defended you, should have stood up for you." "Daniel!" "No, let me finish. I was so worried about keeping Vivian happy, so focused on my own career and social status, that I forgot what really matters. I forgot that you sacrificed everything for me, that you raised me to be better than this." Tears were running down my cheeks now. "You're a good man, Daniel. You just got caught up in trying to build a life with someone whose values don't match the ones I tried to teach you." Vivian's been calling and texting nonstop since we left the restaurant. She's panicking about her job, about what Mr. Westbrook might do. But Mom, honestly, I'm more worried about us, about our relationship, about whether I've damaged it beyond repair. "You haven't," I assured him. "Family relationships are complicated, and people make mistakes. What matters is learning from them and doing better forward." "What did Mr. Westbrook want to discuss with you privately? He mentioned a business proposition." I looked at the folder of documents spread across my table. "He's offered me a position heading up a new division at his company. Angel investments, helping other entrepreneurs the way I apparently helped him." "That's incredible, Mom! Are you going to take it?" "I don't know," I admitted.
It's all so overwhelming. This morning, I was a 70-year-old cleaning lady worrying about making rent. Tonight, I'm supposedly worth millions of dollars with a job offer from a major corporation. I don't know how to process any of it. We talked for another 20 minutes, and for the first time in years, it felt like the conversation I used to have with my son before Vivian came into our lives. When we finally hung up, I felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. I was about to close the folder when I noticed one more document I hadn't read yet. It was titled Angel Investment Division, Proposed Structure and Compensation Package. The proposal was breathtaking in its scope and generosity. Lucas wasn't just offering me a job, he was proposing to create an entire division around my expertise and experience. The Angel Investment Division would be funded with a $50 million initial budget, and I would have complete autonomy to identify and invest in promising startups.
The compensation package included base salary, $300,000 annually, performance bonuses based on investment success, equity participation in successful portfolio companies, full healthcare and retirement benefits, office suite and administrative support staff, travel budget for scouting investments nationally and internationally. But the most meaningful part wasn't the financial compensation. Lucas had included a mission statement for the division that brought tears to my eyes. The Helen Thompson Angel Investment Division will identify and support entrepreneurs who demonstrate exceptional potential but lack access to traditional funding sources. Our focus will be on innovative solutions to global challenges, with special emphasis on investments that create positive social impact alongside financial returns. This division honors the legacy of Mrs. Helen Thompson, whose early investment in Sentinel security systems demonstrated the transformative power of believing in people others overlook. Our goal is to continue that tradition of taking calculated risks on visionary entrepreneurs who will shape the future. I had to stop reading and wipe my eyes. Lucas wasn't just offering me a job. He was asking me to do professionally what I'd been doing instinctively for decades. He was giving me the resources and platform to help entrepreneurs on a scale I'd never imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was from Lucas. Mrs. Thompson, I hope you've had a chance to review the materials I sent with you. I know it's a lot to absorb in one evening. I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow for meetings, but I'll be back Tuesday. Would you be free for lunch Tuesday afternoon? We can discuss everything in detail, and I can answer any questions you might have. No pressure, just conversation between old friends. Lucas. I stared at the message for several minutes before typing back. Lucas, thank you for everything tonight. Yes, I'd like to have lunch Tuesday. I have many questions, and I suspect you have more stories to share. Helen. His response came almost immediately. Wonderful! I'll have my assistant Jennifer call you Monday to arrange details. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about the job offer, tracking you down and being able to properly thank you has been one of the most meaningful moments of my career. Sleep well. You've earned it. I set the phone down and looked around my small apartment. The secondhand furniture, the outdated appliances, the careful organization that came from having so little space. In a few days, if I chose to accept Lucas's offer, I could afford to live anywhere I wanted. I could buy a house, travel the world, never worry about money again. But more than the financial security, what Lucas was offering was a return to purpose. For 4 years, I'd felt like I was marking time, surviving rather than truly living. The work at Sunshine Cleaning Services was honest and necessary, but it wasn't fulfilling in the way my consulting business had been. The Angel Investment Division would give me the chance to do what I'd always loved most, identifying potential in people others dismissed, taking calculated risks on innovative ideas, helping entrepreneurs turn their dreams into reality. It would be like my old consulting work, but with resources I'd never had before and a platform that could amplify my impact exponentially. I thought about all the entrepreneurs detailed in that research report. Marcus Williams at Tesla, Sarah Martinez at Aquapure, the dozens of others who'd built successful companies from the seeds of my early investments. What if I could help hundreds more? What if I could create a legacy that went beyond my own success to encompass all the innovations and job creation that flowed from supporting visionary entrepreneurs? As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked exactly the same as I had this morning. Silver hair, lined face, hands marked by years of hard work. But something in my eyes was different. There was a spark there that had been missing for years, a sense of possibility and purpose that I thought was gone forever. Tomorrow, I would call Mrs. Rodriguez at Sunshine Cleaning Services and give my notice. The work had been honest, and I had been grateful for it, but it was time to move forward. I owed it to Lucas, to all the entrepreneurs whose stories were documented in that research folder, and most importantly, to myself. I was Helen Thompson, angel investor, and it was time to spread my wings again. But first, I had to figure out what to do with the $2.4 million check sitting on my kitchen table. I'd never had a bank account that could handle a deposit that large. I'd never owned anything valuable enough to require lawyers and financial advisors and tax planning. The thought made me laugh out loud. After years of worrying about whether I could afford groceries, I was now worried about managing millions of dollars. It was the kind of problem I'd never expected to have, but somehow I was looking forward to learning how to solve it. My phone rang one more time before I headed to bed. The caller ID showed Vivian's number, but I let it go to voicemail. Whatever she had to say could wait. Tonight was about processing everything that had changed, about imagining the possibilities that lay ahead. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out how to build a new life from the foundation Lucas had helped me rediscover. But tonight, I was simply going to savor the feeling of being valued, respected, and needed again. I was 70 years old, and I was just getting started.
Monday morning arrived, the first real snowfall of the season, coating Riverside Heights in a pristine white blanket that made even my modest neighborhood look elegant. I stood at my small kitchen window, sipping coffee from my chipped mug while watching the snowfall, and marveled at how different everything felt. The same view, the same apartment, the same woman, but somehow everything had changed overnight. The $2.4 million check sat in my purse, safely tucked inside my old wallet next to my Social Security card and worn driver's license. This morning, I would drive to Riverside First National Bank, the same branch where I'd maintained my modest checking account for the past 15 years, and somehow explain to them that Helen Thompson, the customer who typically deposited cleaning service paychecks for $300 to $400 every 2 weeks, needed to make a rather substantial deposit. My phone had been ringing since 7 a.m. Vivian had called 6 times, each voicemail more frantic than the last. Her friends from the dinner party had apparently been calling and texting all night, full of questions about the dramatic scene at Romano's. Word was spreading through their social circle about the shocking revelation, and Vivian was clearly struggling to control the narrative. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them. Whatever Vivian had to say could wait until after I'd figured out how to navigate this new reality. The drive to the bank took longer than usual due to the snow, giving me time to think about the conversation I was about to have. How do you explain to a bank teller that you need to deposit a check that's roughly equivalent to their branch's entire monthly deposit volume? How do you maintain dignity while admitting that you've been cleaning houses for minimum wage when you're apparently worth millions? Riverside First National was a small community bank, the kind of place where the staff knew their regular customers by name. When I walked through the glass doors, shaking snow from my coat, Margaret Chen, behind the customer service desk, looked up with her usual warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. How are you handling this weather?" "Good morning, Margaret. I'm doing well, thank you." I paused, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. I need to speak with someone about making a rather large deposit. Who would be the right person to talk to? Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly.
In the 15 years I'd been banking here, my largest single deposit had probably been the $2,000 insurance settlement that I'd received after a minor car accident in 2019. How large are we talking about, Mrs. Thompson? Anything over $10,000 requires some additional paperwork for federal reporting requirements. I took a deep breath. It's significantly more than $10,000, Margaret. She studied my face, clearly trying to reconcile my statement with her knowledge of my typical financial situation. Let me get Mr. Patterson for you. He's our branch manager, and he'll be able to help you with whatever you need. Robert Patterson was a man in his early 50s who'd been managing this branch for over a decade. He'd personally approved my checking account when I'd first moved to this neighborhood, and he'd been unfailingly kind during the years when my account balance rarely exceeded a few $100s. Mrs. Thompson, he said warmly, extending his hand as Margaret led me to his office, "It's wonderful to see you. Margaret mentioned you need help with a large deposit?" I settled into the chair across from his desk and pulled out the check, my hands trembling slightly, despite my efforts to remain calm. "Mr. Patterson, I need to deposit this check, but I'm not sure my regular checking account is equipped to handle it." I handed him the check and watched his expression change from polite interest to complete shock. He stared at the amount for nearly 30 seconds before looking up at me with confusion and concern. "Mrs. Thompson, this check is for $2.4 million? "Yes, I know." "From Sentinel Security Systems?" "Yes." He studied the check more carefully, examining the signatures and security features. "Mrs. Thompson, forgive me for asking, but how did you come to receive a check of this magnitude from Sentinel Security Systems?" Over the next 20 minutes, I found myself telling Robert Patterson the same story I'd shared at Romano's the night before. His expression shifted from skepticism to amazement as I explained about my investment in Lucas Westbrook's startup, the years of lost contact, and the dramatic reunion at Vivian's birthday dinner. "This is absolutely incredible," he said when I finished. "Mrs. Thompson, I have to tell you, this is the largest single deposit in our branch's history. We're going to need to handle this very carefully to ensure everything is processed correctly." He spent another hour walking me through the paperwork required for such a substantial deposit, explaining federal reporting requirements and discussing options for managing this level of funds. By the time we finished, he'd opened a separate, high-yield savings account for the majority of the funds and had given me the contact information for the bank's wealth management division. "Mrs. Thompson," he said as we concluded our business, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I'm incredibly happy for you. I've watched you handle difficult financial circumstances with such grace over the years, and you deserve every bit of this good fortune." His words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Robert. You've always treated me with kindness, even when I didn't have much to offer as a customer."
"You've always been one of our valued customers," he replied firmly. "The size of your account balance never changed that." As I left the bank, I felt a strange mixture of relief and unreality. The check was deposited, the paperwork was complete, and I was officially a millionaire. But I still felt like the same 70-year-old woman who'd been worried about her heating bill just 2 days ago. My next stop was Sunshine Cleaning Services, where I needed to have what would undoubtedly be one of the most unusual resignation conversations in the company's history. Mrs. Rodriguez was in her small office when I arrived, reviewing schedules for the week ahead. She looked up with surprise when I knocked on her doorframe. "Helen, I wasn't expecting to see you today. Is everything all right?" I settled into the worn chair across from her desk, the same chair where I'd sat 4 years ago as a desperate woman hoping for any kind of steady employment. "Carmen, I need to talk to you about my employment here. I'm going to need to give my notice." Her face immediately filled with concern. "Oh no, Helen. Is everything okay? Are you having health problems? Is your family all right?" "No, nothing like that. Carmen, something extraordinary happened this weekend, and my circumstances have changed dramatically." I spent the next 30 minutes explaining the situation to her, watching her expressions change from confusion to disbelief to joy as she processed what I was telling her. "Helen, this is like something from a movie," she exclaimed when I finished.
All this time, you've been one of my best cleaners, and you're actually a famous investor who helped build major companies?" I laughed at her enthusiasm. I don't know about famous, but yes, it turns out my old business investments were more successful than I ever imagined. Carmen leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in amazement. "You know what this explains? Why you were always so different from my other employees. The way you approached your work, the way you interacted with clients, your problem-solving skills. You always carried yourself like someone who'd done more with their life." Carmen, I want you to know that working here has been a blessing. When I had nowhere else to turn, you gave me an opportunity and treated me with dignity. I'll never forget that. She waved away my thanks. "Helen, you earned every paycheck with hard work and professionalism. But I have to ask, what happens now? Are you going to take this job offer from the security company?" "I think so, yes. It's an opportunity to return to the kind of work I love, helping entrepreneurs build their dreams." Carmen smiled broadly. "Then I'm incredibly happy for you. When do you need to finish here?" "If it's okay with you, I'd like to work through this week. I want to make sure my current clients have time to adjust to a new cleaner, and I have a few houses I'd like to finish properly." "Of course. And Helen, I hope you'll stay in touch. I want to hear all about your new adventures in the business world." As I left Sunshine Cleaning Services, I felt a pang of genuine sadness. The work had been hard and the pay modest, but Carmen Rodriguez and her team had treated me like family during some of the most difficult years of my life. I would miss the camaraderie, the sense of honest accomplishment that came from turning chaos into cleanliness, and the simple rhythms of physical labor that had kept me grounded. But I was also excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something rather than just surviving each day. My phone rang as I was driving home. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh, Mr. Westbrook's assistant. He asked me to call and arrange lunch for tomorrow." "Of course, Jennifer. I was expecting your call." "Wonderful. Mr. Westbrook would like to meet at Azure Restaurant at noon, if that works for you. It's a quiet place where you can talk privately about business matters." Azure Restaurant. I had heard of it, but never been there. It was the kind of upscale establishment where executives entertain important clients, far above my usual budget range. "That sounds perfect, Jennifer." "Excellent. Mr. Westbrook also asked me to let you know that he's arranged for you to meet with our corporate attorney this afternoon, if you're available. There are some legal matters regarding your investment portfolio that need attention." I felt a flutter of nervousness. What kind of legal matters? "Nothing concerning, Mrs. Thompson. It's more about establishing proper documentation for your historical investments and setting up structures to manage your current holdings. Mr. Westbrook wants to make sure everything is handled correctly for tax and legal purposes." We arranged for me to meet with the attorney at 3 p.m., and after ending the call, I realized I needed to reconsider my wardrobe. My usual outfit of comfortable plants and sensible sweaters wasn't going to be appropriate for meetings with corporate attorneys and business lunches at upscale restaurants. My first stop was Meridian Department Store, where I hadn't shopped for anything beyond basic necessities in years. The well-dressed saleswoman who approached me clearly expected to direct me towards the clearance section, but when I explained that I needed several professional outfits for important business meetings, her demeanor shifted immediately. 2 hours later, I emerged with 3 tailored business suits, 4 silk blouses, a wool coat that actually fit properly, and a pair of leather shoes that didn't come from the discount store. The total bill was more than I used to make in 3 months of cleaning, but for the first time in years, I could afford quality clothing that made me feel confident and professional.
The meeting with Sentinel's corporate attorney, Patricia Wells, was both enlightening and overwhelming. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in investment law and corporate structures. She'd spent the morning reviewing the research report on my historical investments and had prepared a comprehensive plan for addressing the legal and financial implications of my newfound wealth. "Mrs. Thompson," she began as we settled in her elegant conference room, "you have a rather unique situation here.
Most of your historical investments were structured as loans rather than equity purchases, but several of the companies involved have indicated they want to retroactively treat them as equity investments and provide appropriate returns. She spread out a series of legal documents across the polished conference table. What this means is that you potentially have ownership stakes in multiple successful companies, but the documentation needs to be updated to reflect current values and establish clear legal standing. Over the next 2 hours, Patricia walked me through the complex process of establishing proper investment structures, creating legal entities to manage my portfolio, and developing tax strategies to minimize the impact of my sudden wealth increase. She explained concepts I'd never encountered: family trusts, investment holding companies, tax-deferred structures, all delivered in language that was professional but accessible. The good news, she concluded, is that we can handle most of this gradually. You don't need to make all these decisions immediately. But Mrs. Thompson, you should know that your total investment portfolio, when properly documented and valued, is likely to be worth significantly more than the $14 million mentioned in the initial research report. The number still felt abstract, too large to truly comprehend. How much more? Patricia consulted her notes. Based on current market valuations and the equity positions you're entitled to claim, I estimate your total investment portfolio could be worth anywhere from $20 to $30 million. I had to grip the arms of my chair from keeping from falling over. $20 to $30 million. The numbers were so large they didn't seem real, like play money from a board game rather than actual wealth I could access and use. Mrs. Thompson, are you all right? You look pale. I'm fine. It's just, this morning I was worried about whether I could afford to replace my old winter boots, and now you're telling me I'm worth $30 million. Patricia smiled with understanding. Sudden wealth can be just as stressful as financial hardship, sometimes more so. That's why Mr. Westbrook wanted to get you connected with proper legal and financial advisors immediately. We want to make sure you have all the support you need to manage this transition successfully. As I left Patricia's office, I felt like I was floating through a dream. The snow had stopped falling, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the downtown streets. Everything looked the same as it had this morning, but I was a completely different person than the one who'd nervously walked into the bank with a check she couldn't quite believe was real. My phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. "Mom, Vivian told me she hasn't been able to reach you. She's really panicked about her job situation. Would you be willing to talk to her?" I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "I'll think about it. I need some time to process everything that has happened." His reply came quickly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I love you, Mom." The simple message brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in years, my relationship with my son felt genuine and uncomplicated, free from the tension that Vivian had created between us. As I drove home through the snowy streets of Riverside Heights, I found myself thinking about the other entrepreneurs mentioned in Patricia's research report. All the people I'd helped over the years who had gone on to build successful companies. How many of them had tried to find me, wanting to share their success and express their gratitude? How many opportunities for connection and celebration had been lost because I'd assumed their ventures had failed? Tomorrow, I would have lunch with Lucas and learn more about the angel investment division he wanted me to lead. But tonight, I was simply going to sit in my small apartment and try to absorb the magnitude of everything that had changed. I was Helen Thompson, and after 4 years of feeling invisible and forgotten, I was about to step into a future that was bigger and more meaningful than anything I'd ever imagined possible. The transformation was complete. The cleaning lady was gone, and the angel investor had returned. 6 months later, the elevator climbed smoothly to the 42nd floor of the Sentinel Tower, carrying me toward my corner office with its panoramic view of the city skyline. As the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar sight of the Helen Thompson Angel Investment Division, bustling with activity as my team of analysts and investment specialists worked on evaluating the latest batch of entrepreneurial proposals. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," called Rebecca Martinez as she approached with a steaming cup of coffee and the morning briefing folder.
Speaking of Daniel, my relationship with him had transformed completely. Without Vivian's toxic influence poisoning every interaction, we'd rediscovered the closeness we'd shared when he was younger. He'd started calling me every Sunday, not out of obligation, but genuine desire to connect. We'd had dinner together twice a week for the past month, and for the first time in years, our conversations felt natural and loving. The situation with Vivian had resolved itself in the most predictable way possible. After her confrontation with Lucas at Romano's, she'd lasted exactly 1 week at Sentinel Security Systems. Her termination hadn't been dramatic or vindictive. Lucas was too professional for that. Instead, she'd simply been reassigned to projects with reduced responsibility until it became clear that her position was no longer tenable. According to Daniel, she'd left the city entirely, moving back to her parents' house in California while she looked for new opportunities. The divorce proceedings had been swift and amicable. Daniel had been more relieved than heartbroken when their marriage ended. He'd admitted to me privately that he'd known for years that Vivian's values didn't align with the principles I'd raised him with, but he'd been too invested in the lifestyle she represented to acknowledge the fundamental incompatibility. "Mom," he'd said during one of our recent dinners, "I'm sorry it took me so long to remember who I really am, what really matters. You raised me better than the man I became when I was with her." The memory of that conversation still brought tears to my eyes. I had my son back, and more importantly, he'd found his way back to himself. My intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Thompson, you have a call from Carmen Rodriguez at Sunshine Cleaning Services." I picked up immediately, always happy to hear from my former boss who'd become a cherished friend. "Carmen, how are you?" "Helen, I'm wonderful, but I'm calling with a request. I have a situation here, and I think you might be the perfect person to help." She explained that one of her long-term clients, an elderly woman named Dorothy Fletcher, was facing eviction from her apartment. Dorothy's Social Security barely covered her basic needs, but she'd been too proud to ask for help. Carmen had been cleaning Dorothy's small apartment for free for the past 2 months, but the situation was becoming unsustainable. "Carmen, give me Dorothy's address. I'll take care of her rent and any other expenses she needs." "Carmen, you don't even know her?" "I don't need to know her personally to know that no 78-year-old woman should face homelessness. Besides, Carmen, you taught me that how we treat people when they have nothing says everything about who we are." After arranging to handle Dorothy Fletcher's financial crisis, I spent a few minutes thinking about how dramatically my perspective on wealth had changed. 6 months ago, a few $100s had seemed like an insurmountable sum. Now, I could solve someone's housing crisis with a phone call, and the money involved was barely a rounding error in my monthly budget. But more than the financial freedom, what I treasured most was the ability to make a meaningful impact. The Helen Thompson Angel Investment Division had already created over 300 jobs through our portfolio companies. We'd funded innovations in clean energy, healthcare, education, and sustainable agriculture. Each successful investment represented not just financial returns, but real improvements in people's lives. Rebecca knocked on my door. "Mrs. Thompson, I have the quarterly report ready for your review before the board meeting." The numbers were impressive. 12 companies funded, $4.2 million invested, projected returns exceeding 300% based on current valuations. But the statistics that mattered most to me were different. 347 jobs created, 15 patents filed, 8 communities served by innovative solutions that traditional investors had deemed unprofitable. At 2 p.m., I made my way to the executive boardroom, where Sentinel's senior leadership team was gathering for our monthly meeting. The room was elegant, polished mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. But what made it special for me was the framed photograph on the wall near my seat. Lucas and I at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Angel Investment Division, both of us smiling with the satisfaction of a dream realized. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began as the meeting started, "I have some exciting news to share. Sentinel Security Systems has been approached by 3 major international corporations interested in licensing our expansion model for angel investment divisions." He looked directly at me as he continued. "Specifically, they want to replicate the Helen Thompson Angel Investment Division model in their own organizations. We've received formal requests from companies in London,
Tokyo, and Sydney, all seeking to establish similar programs. The implications were staggering. The investment model we developed, focusing on overlooked entrepreneurs with innovative solutions to social problems, could be implemented globally, potentially helping thousands of visionary business leaders who are currently struggling to find funding. "Mrs. Thompson," Lucas said, "how would you feel about taking on an international consulting role, helping other major corporations establish their own angel investment programs based on your expertise?" I felt a familiar thrill of possibility, the same excitement I'd experienced 26 years ago when I first decided to take risks on promising entrepreneurs. "Lucas, I'd be honored, but I want to make sure we maintain the integrity of what we're doing here. This isn't just about generating returns, it's about changing lives and solving real problems."
Absolutely, he agreed. That's exactly why these companies want to work with us. They've seen that our approach generates both superior financial returns and positive social impact. They want to learn how to identify and support entrepreneurs who create value beyond just profit. As the meeting concluded, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible, dismissed, humiliated at a family dinner by people who saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment. Tonight, I was leading discussions about expanding a revolutionary investment model to companies around the world. But the real transformation wasn't about money or status or professional recognition. It was about purpose, about feeling useful and valued, about being able to use my experience and skills to make a genuine difference in the world. As I packed up my briefcase and prepared to leave the office, Rebecca stopped by with one final piece of news. "Mrs. Thompson, I just got off the phone with Maria Santos at Greenflow Technologies. She wanted me to tell you that they're dedicating their new research facility to you, the Helen Thompson Center for Sustainable Water Innovation. She says you gave her hope when she had none left, and she wants other young entrepreneurs to know that someone believes in their dreams." I had to sit down, overwhelmed by the unexpected honor. 26 years ago, I'd written a check to a desperate young man named Lucas Westbrook because I believed innovation and determination deserved support. That single decision had created a ripple effect that was still expanding, touching lives and creating opportunities in ways I never could have imagined. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Riverside Heights, I thought about calling Daniel to share the day's excitement, maybe inviting him for dinner to celebrate the international expansion news. I thought about Dorothy Fletcher, who would sleep securely tonight because someone cared enough to help. I thought about James Davidson, who was probably calling his family right now to share the news that his solar cooperative dream was becoming reality. My small apartment looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, but I decided to keep living there for now. The space held memories of my transformation, and besides, I'd learned that happiness didn't come from expensive surroundings. It came from meaningful work, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of using your gifts to help others succeed. As I prepared dinner, my phone rang with Lucas's name on the caller ID. "Helen, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to share something personal with you." "Of course, Lucas. What's on your mind?" "Today marks exactly 26 years, 4 months, and 12 days since you wrote that first check for my security system startup." I smiled, touched that he'd kept such precise track. "Has it really been that long?" "It has. And Helen, I want you to know that not a single day has passed without me being grateful for your faith in me. But more than that, I'm grateful for the opportunity to witness your second chapter, to see you reclaim the recognition and respect you deserve." His words brought tears to my eyes. "Lucas, you gave me back more than money. You gave me back my sense of purpose, my belief in myself, my hope for the future." "We gave those things back to each other," he corrected gently. "And now we get to spend the next 26 years helping other dreamers find their own second chances." After we hung up, I sat in my small kitchen, surrounded by the familiar comforts of my modest home, and felt a deep sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow, I would return to my office in the Sentinel Tower, where entrepreneurs from around the world would present their visions and ask for my support. I would evaluate their plans, challenge their assumptions, and hopefully identify the next generation of innovators who would change the world in ways we couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, I was simply Helen Thompson, a 70-year-old woman who had learned that it's never too late for transformation, never too late to discover your true value, and never too late to begin the most meaningful chapter of your life. I was an angel investor, and I was just getting started. Next up, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.